As a mother, wife, and divorce attorney for over 15 years, experience has taught me a lot about how to deal with times of uncertainty, transition, and facing opportunities for growth. I'm happy you're joining me for this part of the journey. When it comes to educating children, one size does not fit all. My guest here today is Sharon Ramage. Sharon has spent her life dedicated to helping families, first as a social worker and then as an attorney. Her practice, the Ramage Law Group, focuses on helping families in transition, in divorce, and other family law matters, but she also has expertise in the area of special education law. Sharon is here today to talk with us about special education and the law. Sharon, thank you so much for taking time to come and be here with us today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for having me.
When we talk about special education law, there's a lot I don't know. And I want to start off by just asking you, what is special education? What are we talking about when we use that term?
Well, we're talking about services that are designed to meet kids where they are, because one size doesn't fit all. To date myself a little bit, when I grew up, special education was that room down the hallway that everybody tiptoed past. And that's really not the case. Special education is, the law is called IDEA, IDEA, and it's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And what it requires school districts to do is first find children who have disabilities, and because of those disabilities need some special help, specially designed instruction, but it requires them to develop individualized plans for them. So we can help all kids obtain a meaningful educational benefit from their program. And it also requires that we respect them and that we honor them by educating them in the least appropriate or the least restrictive environment that is appropriate for them. And so that is special education in a nutshell. It's find them, serve them, and implement that IEP and do it in the place that is most appropriate for them.
So I think there's some confusion about what constitutes a special need for a child. So you and I were talking about this earlier. For example, like ADHD, is that a special need?
Can be. The law defines some very clear eligibilities is what we call them. We don't call them diagnoses. That's a medical term. But a lot of times children who have ADHD that may qualify them to receive services under what we call other health impairment. But it runs the gamut. We have intellectual disabilities, autism, a lot of different specific learning disabilities, whether that's in reading fluency, reading comprehension, math calculation. There are written expression, listening comprehension. So there are specific learning disabilities. There is, of course, hearing impairment, visual impairment. I think deaf, blind, I can't name all of them off the top of my head because I don't have my book in front of me. But we have a series of eligibilities that first question is, does the child have a disability that qualifies them under this category? And because of this disability, do they require special education related services?
So you said the first step is find them. And so how does that usually come about? Is that parents identifying that there might be something wrong? Is that coming from a pediatrician or is that coming from the school? How do we go about knowing whether or not our child might have a special education need?
Well, it actually comes from all the above. Sometimes children, we know about their disabilities very early on. Children with autism frequently very early on, or children with some developmental disabilities, maybe they've been served by ECI, early childhood intervention, and they then become eligible for special education related services as early as the age of 3. And then there are some disabilities that don't necessarily become readily apparent until they're in school and you see that they're falling behind. And so sometimes a therapist may refer you to an evaluation. Sometimes it may come from a pediatrician. Sometimes it may come from a teacher. Sometimes it may be your parental gut feeling. And everyone has the right to go to their school and say, I think my child has some issues. I want a special education evaluation. And it's really important that they ask for that evaluation because it starts some timelines that schools have to comply with. And so, but it doesn't take proof that your child has a disability. It just takes suspicion that there is some sort of disability that is impacting this child's access to the educational system.
So if you're a parent and you have a feeling that something may not be quite right or something's different, maybe it's not that's not quite right, but that your child, you notice that your child's developing differently maybe than other children, what is your first step? Who do you contact the school? What if your child's not yet in school?
Well, if your child's not yet in school and if your child's under 3, of course you go through ECI. But if your child is
So hold on for just a second. So ECI,
early childhood intervention.
and is that like an office within a school, or how do you get a hold of ECI?
Those are separate services, a separate agency, and different agencies in different counties operate the ECI program. And typically that would be a pediatrician referral.
Okay. So every county has an ECI?
They should. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or every region.
All right, great. So good. I just want to boil this down so we kind of walk through what does this look like?
And that's preschool age, but as early as 3, they can be served within the public school system, depending on the disability. Sometimes you see children who have speech impairments that are receiving speech services between the ages of 3 and when they start kindergarten. Sometimes these are children that have intellectual disabilities or that have some other need for specialized instruction very early on. And so as early as 3. But if you suspect that your child has a disability, you go to your school and you ask for that evaluation, because the school under federal law has a responsibility. It's called a child find responsibility, and it's to get out there and find those children, identify the children who require special education services.
So is the school, is it the public school that the child would be attending? Does it depend on if the parents are separated and live in different school districts? How does that get decided?
It's the child where the public school that the child could attend. So as we know, with divorced families, the child can attend the district where either parent resides. But it would be the school where the child would attend. If the child is in a private school, schools even have the responsibility to seek out and find and identify those children with disabilities that attend private schools within their borders. So, for example, I live up in McKinney, and we have plenty of private schools in McKinney. Well, they have an obligation to locate those children even within the private school system to offer them an evaluation.
So if a child is enrolled in private school, is the public school sending people out to go find the children, or is usually the private school, there's some communication and they'll make the arrangements?
There's typically communication with the private school and the public school, and they all have child find drives that they do. I think you drive up and down 75 and there's a big child find billboard. I know at least in several places along the highway to alert the public that we know we have to evaluate these children and we're available to evaluate. Now, if your child is school age and you're in a private school or you're on a homeschool is considered a private school. So that duty to evaluate even extends to those children who are being homeschooled by their parents.
So when I hear the word evaluation, I'm thinking big dollars. How much does it cost for parents to have their child evaluated?
Has to be free. We use a lot of acronyms in the world of special education, and one is called FAPE. That's Free Appropriate Public Education, and that means they evaluate these children without charging you, and they serve them without charging you. And if you get that evaluation back and you disagree with it, you're entitled to an independent educational evaluation at the school's expense. And so a lot of people don't know that, and they think they're stuck with whatever the school has come back with. If you disagree, maybe the school has said, well, we don't believe your child's eligible, but you really believe your child should be eligible. You ask for that independent evaluation, and the school has 2 choices. They either give it to you or they sue you. They file a due process complaint to defend their own evaluation. Typically, they're going to offer you the independent evaluation.
So that raises my next question of when are parents contacting a special education lawyer? When do you come into play?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of times it's real late in the game and a lot's been lost. But I always encourage parents as early on, once your child is receiving services, arm yourself with knowledge, go to workshops, learn about the law, contact us. But if your child's being denied an evaluation, you can contact an attorney. If your child's not making progress and is falling behind, and maybe the school's refusing to evaluate, contact an attorney. Or if your child is receiving services and you just don't think they're appropriate, or your child is not making progress, you can contact an attorney. Or if they're proposing a placement that's not appropriate for your child, you can contact an attorney. Or you can file on your own. I wouldn't recommend it. But see, there is a process in place where people can actually file a complaint with TEA and have a hearing officer. Most of those cases are heard by the State Office of Administrative Hearings now, but have a hearing officer serve as a judge in the case and then make a decision and tell the school district what it needs to do to fix it.
So what if I want to back up for a second because, okay, you learn that your child has a special need.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing I know, I think a lot of parents think the next step is to then, get them in a private education environment that's tailored to meet those needs. But that's not necessarily the case. What is the school system obligated to provide for these kiddos?
They're obligated to provide specially designed instruction so the child will make a meaningful educational benefit. And they can't remove them from the school because of the disability. A lot of people assume that they'll just go find a private school. And private schools aren't obligated. They do not have to keep your child in their program. And this happens a lot with children with behavioral disabilities or developmental disabilities. And sometimes they're just not equipped. Some are. But the school is obligated to provide that education. And if they don't have the ability to do it, they have to go out and find it for you. I have very many kids on my caseload that are placed in private day schools, residential treatment centers at the expense of the school because the school couldn't within their district serve the kids' needs.
So who is paying for, I just want to stop because I think that's huge. It's so important for parents to know that there are so many resources that are available to them. If they need to consult with a lawyer, how do lawyer fees work if you're having to take a case, to trial to, force the school district to do what they're supposed to do?
Well, I don't think I'm that different from most lawyers that are in this field that handle this. We do kind of modify our fees a little bit because the law says if we go to hearing and prevail, the parent is entitled to recover attorney's fees. It's a private attorney general statute is what it's called. And so that gives a little bit of a hammer to the districts because they know if they go to hearing and they lose, they're going to be paying my fees as well as their own. And so I'm able to work with parents so they're not paying as much as on the front end because I know we're going to be either negotiating at mediation or receiving fees on the back end.
Okay, so that's important to know too.
Very important.
And I would think, if nothing else, if you're in a situation where you just learned that your child has special needs, just consulting with a lawyer early on, just to
Absolutely.
pay an hourly, come in and just sit down and kind of know and learn your rights and get resources. So do you often meet with people just for an initial consultation?
We will meet with people to consult with them. Sometimes we will coach them prior to their we call them in Texas ARD committee meetings. That's the meeting where the IEP is developed. Perhaps even sometimes go to those meetings with the parents if it helps them, and give them advice along the way. I also have a network of advocates and diagnosticians and ABA therapists, any people that work within the field that I can refer people to.
So you just use an acronym, IEP. I know it's hard not to talk in acronyms.
It is.
And so tell us what an IEP is and other types of meetings that parents might be involved in when advocating for their child's needs.
Okay. Well, an IEP is an individualized education plan, and that is the plan that is developed by the school officials and the parent that is specific to the child's needs. It is designed to meet them where they are so they can have a meaningful educational benefit, which the Supreme Court has actually said that means you meet the child pretty much where they are. What is appropriately ambitious for this child based on the child's circumstances. And so that's an IEP. You have to have one every year, has to be done at least annually, can be done more frequently if there are changes within the year, but at a a minimum annually, and it consists of school administrator, evaluation personnel, a special education teacher, a general education teacher, and the parent. The parent is a part of that committee and is required to be as a part of that committee. And so in Texas, they meet in what is called ARD committees. That's the admissions review and dismissal process. Other parts of the country, they call it the IEP team, but we call it the ARD committee in Texas. And that is the committee that convenes to identify where the child is, what are their present levels of performance, and what types of goals do we have to adopt so the child can move and make progress between now and the next year.
Okay. And both parents, do both parents need to be involved in this or just one parent?
I would highly encourage both parents to be involved, because especially if you've got situations where there are two families and two households, you've got to have parents on the same page. That's ideal, but one parent needs to be involved.
Okay. Well, this kind of leads me into my next question, which is, the intersection of family law and education law, which is something you deal with every day.
Yes.
So what advice do you have if parents are not living together anymore, if they are separated? What advice do you have for families who have a special needs child?
Well, the first thing they need to do is make sure their order says that one parent has exclusive educational rights, because it becomes a problem down the road if there isn't. That doesn't mean one parent is less than or one parent that is greater than, but you need to have that go-to that can make those decisions. Because you and I both know in intact families, we all have our strengths. And, dealing with the lawn people might be my husband's strength, dealing with the bank might be my husband's strength, but dealing with the educational system is mine. And so you need to have one parent make those decisions. And it's very important, because if you get to a situation where you have the parents in disagreement, unfortunately, the kid gets lost in the shuffle. And if there's no agreement, then the kid's not going to get the services he potentially needs, or potentially you need somebody that can stand their ground with the school as well, because unfortunately schools don't always do the right thing. And you could end up in a situation where the school implements a program that may really not be good for the child. So you need that one person.
And that you brought up another point, which is how important it is for parents to be advocates in their child's education, that you can't just sit back and assume that the school is going to do what it's supposed to do.
No, we've got a crisis right now at Dallas ISD. They've just done a pretty big expose where they are years behind on their evaluations. And it's, in several years when I stopped being a hearing officer and started representing parents, we were getting all of these calls. And I didn't understand it, because schools were just refusing to evaluate kids, saying there was no educational need for an evaluation. Well, the educational need is answered by the evaluation, and I didn't understand it. Well, the Houston Chronicle did a pretty big expose on the entire system in Texas, and there was an not so unwritten cap of 8% of the population in Texas, and Texas students were being served under the special education umbrella, compared to about 12 to 13% throughout the nation. And so what we found is there was an incentive to under-identify kids. That has since stopped. We're still recovering from the effects of that, but we were way, way underrepresented. You had a lot of parents that had been asking for help, but they weren't getting their evaluations. And so you had kids that were going year after year after year behind. And so that's really important. The other thing that's really important to be an advocate is, up until this last legislative session, there has been a 1-year statute of limitations. And if you think with your own children, the better part of a school year goes by pretty quick before you even realize what's going on, right? Your child could be falling further and further behind and you wouldn't know it. And you look up and the statute of limitations is almost gone. Well, fortunately, our legislature just passed a bill that expanded the statute of limitations to 2 years, which is going to be a big help to families, because it gives us some breathing room to get in, figure out what's going on, and then actually hold schools accountable when they have failed. So provided the governor does not veto it, it's going to be the law June 20th. So if not sooner, if he signs it sooner.
That's great. I'm just thinking as you're talking about that, I mean, I know so often, it isn't until you get through the first semester that you get a report card and you realize, things are not going so well. And that really doesn't give time at all to work through and see what's going on and try and get an assessment done and all of that.
Well, and even though the law requires that there be progress reports according to the student's IEP goals, at least as frequently as what regular reports are sent out, sometimes those don't give you much information. It'll just be a check the box, and it doesn't give a really good picture of what's going on with the kid. And so it's really important to stay on top of it. And 2 years is still not a long time, but it's better than 1.
So tell me, Sharon, I know you don't have a crystal ball, at least I didn't see you bring one in today, but I'm just guessing you were coming off the heels of the pandemic with kids being schooled at home. What are you anticipating in terms of kiddos who maybe, have gone a year and a half without?
Well, we're already seeing the effect of that. I will tell you, I took in more cases in April of 2021 than I did between March of 2020 and March of 2021. It's like once the mask mandate was lifted and we really realized everybody is going back to school, people are waking up and they're very angry because they see how far their child is behind. We had kids not getting evaluations. We had kids not getting any services, I've even had families where they're typically developing children who are in regular education classes were getting daily Zoom classes, and they were on Zoom pretty much most of the day and getting the same work they'd always gotten, where the disabled child got nothing, but a box dropped off for them, with parents that but they're not special educators. And so you have a population of kids that has received no services for a year. So that's why it's really important right now that statute of limitations has been expanded, because prior to a couple of weeks ago when this passed out of the legislature, most of us in the field were really concerned because we're coming up on that 1 year almost being over. And but now we have these kids that hopefully we can get some help to them. And that comes in the form of compensatory services. One of the things we ask for when we file a case against the school district is not only for them to fix the program going forward, but what's it going to take to get this child back to where they should have been had you been doing what was appropriate for the child all along. And so that's called compensatory services. And sometimes that's extra tutoring, sometimes it's some summer programs, sometimes it's a fund for the parent to go out and get some services themselves.
So compensatory is actual money being paid to help provide additional resources.
It's actually additional services. Okay. Sometimes it comes in the form of funds to provide it for the parents, but it's the statute is not a money damages statute, but sometimes money buys those services. And sometimes depending on how bad it is, what you're doing to fix it going forward may be kind of a combination of compensatory services and what the kid needs now. So if, for example, kids that require a residential treatment center because maybe not only does their disability require it, but they've deteriorated because of lack of services, that would be a situation where maybe the focus is more on what we're going to do going forward with this new program and a new placement rather than the compensatory services.
I want to go back for just a minute and talk about something that I think is really important for people to understand, and that is the education right. So when you do have a family who is, dividing households, whether through divorce or separation, there are those rights and duties that are allocated that you and I are very familiar with. And one of them is the right to make education decisions. And I think most of the time, I have thought, that's the right to decide where the child's going to school. But it impacts so much more than just the decision of where the child's going to school. Can you share with us a little bit about, practically speaking, what that right to make education decisions can mean for a parent?
Oh, it can mean so much. It can mean, agreeing or disagreeing with the child's educational goals. I had a case not too long ago where the child really did need to be in a residential treatment center. And one of the things that we have the ability under the law to do is to go withdraw the kid from school and put the school on notice that, hey, you've messed up. What you've done is not appropriate. We're going to go place ourselves, and we're going to file a complaint with TEA, and we're going to ask you to reimburse us. We couldn't do that because both parents weren't in agreement. And they had joint educational decisions. And so this kid kept getting further and further behind, deteriorating further till we could get it all straightened out. One parent needs to be the one to make those educational decisions because it can impact educational services. It can impact whether the child receives speech services. It can impact whether the child is even identified as a child with a disability. There is an Office of Special Education Programs letter from several years ago that talked about what do you do if both parents have independent rights, and one parent agrees with this evaluation that says this kid has autism and needs special education, and the other one doesn't, and then just revokes services. And kind of the general comment within the guidance was that the right to revoke those services is greater than the right to take them or to accept them. And so until those people had to go to court, fight it out in family court then to figure out who gets that decision. So it is very important, especially I'll have people a lot of times say, well, the kid's only 3. We don't need to worry about this now. But a lot of times those disabilities do not become apparent until the child's in school. So it's very important. Just designate one. It's really important.
And if you're concerned, if the other parent has been the one who's, kind of taken the lead, like you said, that's sort of that was in their basket, was education rights. I mean, you're worried about them, going off and doing things. You can have an exclusive right that requires consultation or notice the other person first.
Absolutely.
So that way, at least, you're being apprised and kept and being notified. And if there is something you disagree with, then you have an opportunity to take it to court and to get the judge to do something if there's some damage going to be done to your child.
But meanwhile, somebody needs to be able to make the decisions in a trench. And a lot of times I've seen even people try to make tiebreakers. That's a disaster. First of all, they're not even going to be a consensus member of the ARD committee. The law has specific individuals that are actually, and it's not really a vote, but decision makers within the school. And the parent is one of them, not the school counselor down the street, not the minister, not, you don't want to actually turn all of that decision making over to the school. And so it really, the buck needs to stop with one of them.
That's great information. And I think one that is certainly I'm hearing, and that will impact going forward, future cases.
It's my soapbox.
How did you get involved in special education?
Well, I was a social worker before I went to law school, and I actually was a child abuse social worker, worked for CPS, and went to law school and was a prosecutor. But during one of my summers, I clerked for a law firm in Fort Worth that represented school districts. So when I kind of got to the point at the DA's office that it was time to go do something different, I called the lawyer that I'd worked with there, and I said, I think I want to do school law, because I had narrowed it down to these 2 areas. So what do I do? And she said, well, Sharon, I think you should try special education. I had no idea what it was. I'm like, okay, well, who do I talk to? And so she introduced me to another lawyer who still practices special education law representing parents. I met with her. She connected me with some other people. I met with some advocates. I left my job at the DA's office and I got a bunch of books. And I had enough money to last for 90 days. And I thought I would go sit in my office and just read and get really knowledgeable in 90 days. And then I'd start taking cases. And that lasted 3 days. And so I represented parents. Then I went to work for a firm that's local representing school districts. And when I left that firm and went back out on my own, started representing parents again, but I knew about the hearing officer system. So I thought, this would be an area where I could make an impact. And so I applied for and received an appointment as a special education hearing officer and did that for almost 14 years. And loved it, really liked, I sat as the judge on these cases, made decisions, and really felt like I could have an impact. But the impact is so limited because you're tied to your decision as a decision maker is only as good as the information that the parties bring to you. And so I was seeing there is a shortage of attorneys that represent parents. So I left my hearing officer gig and started representing parents back in 2015 and have ever since. It's a very good complement to special education, or to family law and special education complement each other well because there are overlaps and the dynamics are very similar.
And I imagine there's a real reward in seeing parents through the process and seeing them get the help their child needs.
There is. it can be a little disheartening at times too, because sometimes it's impossible to undo years worth of damage. But my mantra in my office is our job is to leave them in a better position than they were when they came to us. And so maybe the answer for the last 2 or 3 years of a child's school career is they are in a more intensive day program, and are they ever going to catch fully up? Probably not, but we can make a whole lot of headway and get them into a better position. And that's what I do. I love what I do.
What hope do you have for parents who maybe have just learned that they have a child with special needs? What message would you give them?
Oh, well, first of all, you're not alone. Get in touch with any support group, whether your child has autism, your child has learning disabilities, your child has dyslexia, or your child is intellectually disabled. Whatever your child's disability is, there are support groups for you. Get into those and educate yourself. It seems overwhelming, and you're going to seem and feel like you're outnumbered when you go meet with the school. But knowledge is power, so arm yourself with it. Go arm yourself with that power and be your child's advocate. That's the best thing you can do, because there is hope for you. If you can advocate for your child, there's hope for your child. And, all children have the right to be respected, to be honored, and to have the same advantages and access to education as their typically developing peers. Whether they're disabled, whether they're typically developing, they all have that right. And so there are people here to help you make sure that your child's right is honored.
That is such an important message. Thank you so much for taking time to come and visit with us today. If you want to learn more information about the Ramage Law Group or Sharon and her practice, we will include links to that below and hope you will follow up. Thank you.
Thank you.